This is Aisha Siddiqa with Neighbors Talking, a program on of interest to South Asia. I'm here today with Mr. Manoj Joshi, a renowned Indian journalist and distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. A lot always to learn from Manoj, and here we are together to learn from him about the most important issue of today of South Asian interest, which is India-China relations. And Manoj, I would love if you would enlighten me and the viewers and listeners. Uh, India and China have just pulled back from the line of actual control. There seems to be some peace. But where do you see the relationship going now?
Aisha, the events of 2020, and I may just put out an advertisement for my book, which has just come out has been published by Hearst in London. So
Certainly.
so this book, India-China Border, Understanding the India-China Border, uh, basically in 2020, certain things happened on the India-China border in the Ladakh area.
Sure.
The Chinese came up and they blockaded 5 areas where earlier Indian patrols used to also go in. Given the nature of the line of actual control, there are about 18 places where both sides exercise claims and both sides used to freely patrol. But in April, May 2020, they came and blockaded the Indian side, and also massed a lot of troops in Ladakh, opposite the line of actual control in Ladakh. The essence of that was that it brought uh, a collapse of the confidence building measures regime that India and China had worked out since the 1990s. Since the 1990s, we had had a series of agreements on how to keep peace on the line of actual control. This is about 4,000 kilometers long. It is militarized. It is in an inhospitable high mountain area where there's virtually no habitation.
Right. Right.
And as I said, it's militarized. So the point was to keep peace there. And the arrangements were fairly elaborate in the sense that if patrols of the two sides met, they would show each other banners saying this is Indian territory or this is Chinese territory, and then they would go back. Then their officers would meet. And so from 1993 to 2020, there had not been a single casualty out here. Though
Okay.
there had been some physical kind of scrimmages that had been taking place. But in 2020, in Galwan, there was a clash. And characteristic of the India-China agreements, this clash was with fists and stones and clubs. It wasn't with guns.
Okay.
Because part of that whole peacekeeping regime was that you can't use guns in that area, in the line of actual control. And so they had fisticuff, and 20 Indian soldiers died. The Chinese say 4 died, though there are estimates that maybe there could have been more. Whatever it is, for the first time since 1975, there were casualties. People died along the line of actual control.
So you're suggesting that there's something substantive which change in the nature of conflict.
Yes, yes. And what is substantive is that, look, you had confidence building measures 1993, 1996, you had military confidence building measures, which meant that
Right.
if either side conducted exercises of more than a brigade near the LAC, they would inform the other side. They were not supposed to conduct exercises beyond a division in any case nearby. Very elaborate kind of details in these agreements. So 93, 96, 2005, 2012. So these were agreements between the two
Okay.
sides, and they,
Okay.
by and large, they kept that peace. And so what happened in Eastern Ladakh, and I say Eastern Ladakh because the situation has remains more or less unchanged in the other sectors of the India-China border. So
Okay.
in Eastern Ladakh, what has happened is mutual trust has come crashing down. Okay, so now the Indian side has given permission to its soldiers that they can use guns to defend themselves. So one major issue relating to peacekeeping has been torpedoed, meaning the level of tension is of a different nature when people can shoot at each other. See, and so
But
mutual trust.
some would argue that it was actually also provocation from the Indian side, which led to uh, China stepping in. Would you see it this way?
But what kind of provocation could it be?
India was also building infrastructure.
Ah, okay. You see, now when it comes to infrastructure, the Chinese, they were, see, actually, the Chinese have not really provided us really information explanation for
Okay,
this move, because as I said, the mutual trust has gone. Sino-Indian relations have gone for a six. The Indians have made it very clear that unless there's a return to status quo ante of April 2020, there's going to be no normalization of relations. Though the Chinese have been insisting that no, 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 let's normalize relations. They've been saying this for the past year and a half. But the Indians have refused blankly. Now, the point that you have made about the infrastructure, that's an interesting point. You see, the border between India and China is completely asymmetrical. On
okay,
one side, you have the plateau of Tibet, hard ground. You don't even need to construct a road. You can just mark it out with stones, and the road is good enough for military traffic in Tibet. On the Indian side is the high and very fragile Himalaya. Trying to build a road there, every year roads come crashing down because of the monsoon, um, maybe earthquakes or something or the other. Extremely fragile. So the Indians have been something like, maybe say, I would say 20, 25 years behind the Chinese in building up an infrastructure. The
okay.
Chinese have first-rate infrastructure out there, right up to their posts. Up to each of their posts, they have two-lane highways, metal roads. So the Indian road up to going past Galwan, going up to the northernmost areas, the Daulat Beg Oldie post, was, I think, it was inaugurated in April of 2020. And as I said, this is all an extremely fragile area. It's a single road, militarily extremely easy to disrupt. I think even with the use of drones, you could disrupt the road. So to say that the Indian construction of infrastructure was somehow destabilizing doesn't really hold water, because the Chinese infrastructure is far superior, far superior.
But now that they have decided to pull back the troops, uh, where do you see? I mean, is it going to go forward? Is peace going to go forward?
Well, let me tell you something about this pullback. This is also
Okay,
interesting because there's not really, this is the kind of what they're doing is that in these five areas I spoke of, so in three
right.
areas so
Okay,
far, there is agreement. So they will pull back. This guy will, one side will pull back 5 kilometers, the other side will pull back 2.5 kilometers, and in between will be a no patrol zone.
okay.
So in three of these areas, this new no patrol zone has come up. Some no one no patrol zone is just about three in Galwan, the place where the clash took place. That's just about 3 kilometers no patrol zone. Okay, so
Okay.
it's not as though they have the second stage of disengagement was to have withdrawn the troops from there. The second stage hasn't come because the Indians say that unless and until all five areas there is disengagement, you know, you
Hmm.
can't go back to you can't have the second stage after disengagement where the troops themselves pull back. So both sides have pretty heavy military formations there. But the point of interest is that neither side has enough military to overwhelm the other. So both sides have been actually very
Okay.
careful in their own way in not building up to the point where the other side feels that a military attack is imminent. And
But
given the nature of the terrain, it's easy by satellite and other ways to determine, because there's nothing you can't hide in that plateau, in that mountain range.
let me ask you, kind of take you to, to India and Indian capacity. Yeah, I mean, I see your point that both sides do not have the capacity to push the other beyond a point. But what about Indian capacity? I mean, how far do you think the Indian government wants to take the conflict, especially given India's dependency, huge dependency on trade with China. Uh, how far New Delhi can really go as far as conflict is concerned.
You really can't go very far, meaning that's very obvious. Meaning, I told you that the infrastructure goes against India. India is just about now, as a result of this 2020 conflict, for the first time, we moved a strike core from facing Pakistan towards to facing make it face China. Meaning, all this time, because of lethargy, you may call it, or just habits, or whatever it is, the strike formations of the Indian army were aimed at Pakistan. And
Right.
now, for the first time, after this 2020 thing, they have started looking at China. So the one of the strike corps was redeployed to face China. So India, the nature of, as I said, this is an asymmetrical, the Tibet and the Indian border. This is a very asymmetrical kind of a situation. So there are parts of the border which are just about 400 kilometers from, as a crow flies, from the Indian, 400 or even less, 300 kilometers from the Indian heartland, which is, let's say,
Right.
UP,
Right.
Bihar, and Delhi. Whereas, for Indian, the Chinese heartland is at least 3,000 kilometers away.
Okay.
So
Right.
I'm saying, if you have a kind of a conflict where, let's say, long range missiles are used to destroy railway stations, staging areas, ammunition dumps, depots, you have that kind of a conflict, India would be at a disadvantage automatically.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
so the I and of course we also have to take into account the fact that both not India and China are nuclear weapons powers. So I don't think that they would like to get into an all-out kind of a scenario, all-out battle, which would could escalate to the nuclear side. I don't
Yeah.
think.
I mean, I completely understand the nuclear angle, which is very critical. But what about trade? I mean, does trade have no significance in in this scenario?
Trade does have, in the sense, that in this first, just yesterday, I had the figures. In the first 6 months of this year, the trade with Chinese export to India gone up something like 35, 36%. And last year, again, they had gone up hugely. Okay. Though Indian exports have come down a bit. So it is a trade which China dominates. And it is, according to some figures, China is India's leading trading partner. It has exceeded even the United States. Now the point is, they India, like United States in certain ways, we don't have too many options. China is such a manufacturing superpower that you want to reduce the Chinese salience in your, let's say, basket of goods that you import. Where do you get them from? I'm saying I want to import, iPhones, these pens, toys, furniture, manufacturing stuff. China is the world's leading manufacturing power, and India has, after 2020, India did, for example, ban 20, 30 Chinese apps. Currently, India has been cracking down on Chinese telephone companies, which are the dominant in the Indian market. For the cheaper phones, the Chinese
Okay.
are dominant. So now the point is that, where does India go to? Meaning, if you want to, that's the reason. For example, even the United States, their embargo is on the is primarily on high tech goods, high tech
You
stuff,
know,
kind of semiconductors and things like that. But for a whole range of other stuff, the world has no option. You have got to go to China.
the reason I ask, I hope you also understand one of my angles, which is that, we constantly, I mean, Pakistan has this understanding, on people there are told that, trade is the way to solve issues. So, is that not happening in China's case?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, but I don't think. I mean, say, I should just look at the point of the US and China. They are far more
Right.
deeply entangled in trade. and they're far more antagonistic than India and China. The India and China, we are still meeting. We meet at the SCO, we meet at different places. Our foreign ministers meet. Indeed, our military, meaning the same fellows in Ladakh, we've had 16 rounds of corps commander level talks. We have even lower level talks, meaning hundreds of telephone conversations, etc., across the line of actual control. All that is there. But the
Hmm.
thing, the point is that logic that trade shall trade and mutual interdependence. I don't think that works anymore.
Re- That's interesting. But since you mentioned United States, let me also ask you that there is also this other factor, which is developing US India relationship. Now, that in itself could be a issue, could be a pressure on India. So the question then is that if in the future there is a US China war in Taiwan, now what pressure would it result in for India, and how will India, in your estimation, how will India react?
Well, the facts are very obvious. We have a 4,000-kilometer disputed border. There are armies on both sides. Okay, so it's one thing for the Quad and others to talk about the situation in the Western Pacific. But for India, it's a practical measure. We are facing the PLA one on one right across. And mind you, the PLA is building itself up in Tibet. Very substantial build-up has been undertaken since 2017. We are facing them there. Now, since you asked about Taiwan and the possible, since we are speculating in any case, we say Taiwan conflict. Uh, I don't think India would like to get directly involved in any kind of a naval uh, in a naval any by, let's say, contributing its navy or anything. On the other hand, because of where we are on the Malacca Straits, in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, if the US were to institute some kind of a blockade of China, India could participate in assisting that blockade, which essentially means China's supply lines from across the Indian Ocean. See, we could search and board ships and do that kind of stuff. As I said, I'm just speculating, but it's unlikely that we would like to get involved in an actual shooting
But
kind of a
that in
scenario.
itself, Manoj, that in itself is hair raising stuff. Just imagine, you know, getting involved in a blockade. China will, of course, consider it direct confrontation. Don't you
Well,
think?
that is indeed true. But and as I said, we were speculating. We are now assuming that China is actually attacking Taiwan.
Yeah.
Okay, we are assuming that China is actually attacking Taiwan, and the whole that itself, everything is blown up over that. So at once that happens, as I said, there could be a controlled way in which India could say, okay, we are not seizing any ship, but we are checking for contraband
Okay.
material. There's always kind of some kind of an excuse you can make. We are searching for contraband material that China may be sending to Pakistan. You know, something like that. So I'm saying that harassment more than actual participation in the in any conflict. And actually, the
So,
US doesn't need India's role in any kind of a shooting war, because from the US perspective, I think the way they look at it is that if India is strong enough, and if India builds up its strength across the line of actual control with China, that itself is a factor. That itself
but
is a
why then not sit? And I mean, there can be any amount of possibilities, and I think it will be in India's interest to actually keep the situation under control and stay away from conflict. So why not also talk? I mean, recently we saw the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting of heads of state, and Mr. The Prime Minister, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi was there, but he hardly engaged in a bilateral with Xi Jinping or even Pakistan's Prime Minister. So where do you see? I mean, I think it's an important question that where do you see now India as it resumes leadership of SCO? Where does it plan to take the SEO?
You see, this is the point I made about the trust that was destroyed in 2020.
Okay.
Now, just look at what was happening before that. In 2017, we had a confrontation over Doklam. Okay. In
Okay.
2018, we had a first high level informal summit between India and China in Wuhan. And in October 2019, we had another second high level informal summit in Chennai. So, actually, when you look at it, things are going very well. Things are going very
Right.
well. Informal summits were taking place. We were interacting with the Chinese. If you look at and I've described some of this in my book, you can. They were even talking of the Chinese were saying that they made an offer on the border, and also so things looks pretty good. And then suddenly in April, May 2020, you know, the Chinese suddenly did certain things, which, as I said, till now we have no explanation. We have no explanation. There must be some explanation, but we at least are unable to figure out because, as I said, it wasn't a attack. As I said, it is not as though they carried out a surprise attack. All they did at one level was to blockade our patrols in 5 places and mass troops in Tibet in violation of an existing agreement. So,
Right. Right.
so it was more an act of coercion rather than anything else. It's an act of coercion, but to what end? I can't say. Maybe it had to do with the US. I've not been able to fathom the Chinese behavior. As I said, till 2019, we thought everything was going well, and the two sides had now taken their relationship to a higher level, you know, and but that didn't seem to have happened.
So will India not use the SCO platform to take the relationship or the conversation forward and use, this multilateral forum to bring down the temperature?
I don't think so. I think that this is something we have, as I said, we have adequate bilateral contact. I mean,
Okay.
yes, Mr. Modi has not met with Xi Jinping. That's true, bilaterally. But Wang Yi has met Jaishankar several times. There's been a lot of meetings between them. The Yes, the special representatives have not met, since 2019, I think. And but as I said, there is a lot of otherwise military contact. As I said, 16 rounds of corps commander level meetings in Ladakh. So there is a lot. It's not as though the two sides are not talking to each other.
Hmm,
It's
hmm,
just
hmm.
it's just that when you're talking of summit level meeting, normally, as you know, that in these summit level meetings, uh, especially when you are in a situation of a tangled relationship, the uh, ministers usually work out something which can announce then in the summit level meeting that we have agreed on the following. See, now
Okay.
obviously that agreement is not forthcoming. That
But
point is not forthcoming.
then, the Indian government also says that it wants to, it talks about a multipolar world where it can juggle between China, US, Russia. Uh, I mean, firstly, how does it imagine that will happen if it's not talking to China, not talking to China? And the other is that if it thinks of multipolarity, then I mean, isn't that in itself a variant of non-alignment which essentially had not served India's interest?
You see, multipolarity, non-alignment, all these are fine. But when you're talking of geopolitics, there is also a real world, and in that real world, there are militaries. militaries do their military thing, the uh, what the Chinese call comprehensive national power between India and China, the gap between it has widened. Okay, China is
Okay.
becoming stronger and stronger. India is stagnant at a certain point. Okay, now China may have other weaknesses, but the fact is that when I'm looking at the Chinese concept of comprehensive national power, that gap has widened, and the Indian side feels it prudent to utilize the United States, its relationship with the United States and with the West, to balance China. So this is
Okay.
straightforward. When it comes to power, it's about balance of power. So multipolarity and all that is fine. Yes, we'll cooperate with China when it comes to maybe trade issues, maybe to SCO, maybe to climate change and such things. But when it comes to raw power and geopolitics, I think the Indian course is dictated by its own weakness. That's my point. If India had been stronger, maybe it would not have taken this course. Maybe it would have been adopted multipolarity. But right now, it the way it views the world is that the comprehensive national power between India and China is widening, and it needs to use the United States and the West to soft balancing of China.
Then just one final question to you. I mean, do you see with India's current level of capabilities, how long will it take for India to be at a level where, number one, it feels confident to fight a two front war? Uh, I mean, it's the first time that India sees itself in a two front war situation. And two, even forget about a two front war, where it feels it's capable to look China in its eye militarily much more confidently.
Well, all I can say is it would take a decade of two of high economic growth. Meaning, India was
Okay.
doing fine up to about 2010, 2011. We were doing very well, 80%, 9%, 10% during Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's time. But then Indian growth stalled and it hasn't quite recovered. And when you look at it today, uh, unless and until we have that kind of growth, you know, for a decade, 2 decades at least. Meaning, one could always say 1.5 decades, or even I'm saying even if we can do 1 decade,
Right,
of high
right.
high economic growth, yes, we would have a different worldview. But we don't have it. We don't have it as yet, and so unless we have it, I can't give you an accurate answer.
Thank you, Mr. Manoj Joshi, for your views on India-China relations. I think one of the most important things that I learned today was definitely, besides other things, the linkage between economic growth and military growth. The two are dependent, but as we normally think that a stronger military is the recipe for a strong economy. Here is the case for a strong economy making up for what India lacks at the moment vis-a-vis China. Thank you so much for sparing time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.